I'm very honoured to be here as a representative of Relationships Australia, but also at such a very special occasion at this Behind the Smile event. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Guringai land and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal people present here today and also to any people with lived experience of mental health difficulties. So in the course of my career as a family therapist, there are no more painful experiences than working with a family where a member has suicided. Indeed, my very first family, when I was just out of training, was a family where a 15-year-old boy had taken his own life. The family could make no sense of it at all. And in fact, what sense can you make of it? The only event they could relate to was that he had got braces the week before and that he hated those braces. Somehow they had to find a way to move forward after what was an excruciatingly tragic event, with only a very banal reason for why it happened. So we expect there to be a bigger explanation, as if that really would help, but somehow for people it can. And indeed, there was a bigger explanation for that boy, but it left the family and all the lives he touched absolutely reeling. If that really was the best explanation we had, that it was about those braces, and in fact we'll never know, then as parents, friends and helping professionals, how can we possibly know how to help young people at risk without trying to protect them from every disappointment, every challenge and every experience of suffering? How can we live our lives without jumping at shadows? As parents, we are really up against it. I'll start by just focusing on two rather stereotypical scenarios as illustrations to my points. Firstly, we have the stereotype of the overly dramatic young girl. Much like some of the aspects of my own daughter, I have to say. In fact, when I practiced my speech on my children before I left, I cut those bits out and they said, "Is that me? Are you going to talk about me?" So it's very common, and indeed sometimes daily, that she'll say something like, "The worst thing has ever happened in my life, ever," or "Today was the absolute worst day of my life," or "I literally," and she says it like that, literally, "don't know how I can possibly go on after this." Or what is also very common, "I have no friends and everybody hates me." So like the classic story of crying wolf, when the emotion is always ratcheted up to 10 out of 10, it's hard to know when to move in and when not. In fact, as a parent, the only way not to stay on high alert at all times is to tune some of it out, and some weeks to tune all of it out, to be honest, just so that you can actually function. Because if I was on point every time she said, "Today was the worst day of my entire life," I'd never be able to do anything else. So the risk is, though, that we could miss something, couldn't we, in trying to tune some of it out just to survive. We miss something that was literally a really big deal, rather than just a letting off of steam. So often we might commiserate with other parents sharing stories of the high drama of adolescent girls. And that's supportive to say, "Oh, heavens, there was another catastrophe," and everyone goes, "Oh, in your house too." But it actually increases our blind spots because if you say, "Well, this is part of adolescence and this is part of hormones," and it's a way of getting through, but it's also a way of tuning out. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the moody and sullen boy, which my son also spotted without me telling it was him. So something like this: taciturn, intolerant, hard to engage, grumpy and withdrawn at times. It can be very hard to work out where one mood starts and the other stops. No explanation is given for the grumpiness. Indeed, it's usually denied with, "I'm fine, what's your problem?" So again, events can seem catastrophic. The loss of a friend, a romance that goes wrong, lands on top of already a very low mood and a somewhat defeated attitude. Often again, we could put that down to hormones and life stage and make jokes about boys and leave them to their own devices, they'll grow out of it. But boys can actually be a lot more unsafe in some ways, as they tend to internalise their feelings and withdraw, whereas these dramatic girls who externalise can have a better chance of support from friends and family. So boys in our society are too often caught up in the male stereotypes of the rugged individualist who manages feelings alone. It's easier to comfort a dramatic, sobbing girl than a boy who holds himself stiffly when you put your arms around him. It's tempting to just give up on that. So in terms of some of the ideas about family relationships and parenting, in light of the very important discussions we're going to have here tonight, I guess I just had a few points that I was thinking about in relation to the families that I've worked with. So I guess the first obvious point is that we can't write everything off down to life stage and hormones, that not all adolescents are the same. Don't fall into conversations that they're just attention-seeking, because in fact attention-seeking happens because kids need attention. So the issue is not whether they need attention, it's more what sort of attention and how we can help them language their needs without it being in the kind of ways that we often find off-putting, like coming home drunk every night. That is a form of attention seeking, but we need to help people with conversations. So we need to help kids ask for it in the right way. So normalising feelings is very important, obviously, so that kids don't feel alone. However, it can to kids often feel like minimising. To hear that everybody feels like that can make it hard to say, yes, but I think I could be worse. Actually, I think I could be different to that. It's very normal to have a hard day or a hard week, but it's not normal to feel flat, joyless, lethargic and hopeless for 2 weeks or more, which is the clinical criteria for getting a different sort of attention and assistance. It's really important that we normalise the use of services to get help. So often I've had couples say to me, counselling is the last resort, the thing you do when your relationship is on the rocks. And indeed, I've often felt that people come to me about the same way that they would go and see the dentist have root canal therapy, sort of dragging themselves in there, feeling pretty miserable and thinking, well, you're clearly the kiss of death. But after some sessions, they're more likely to say, I really wish we'd come earlier because this was very doable and we could have done something about this. So particularly for young people, we want them to routinely use assistance as a way of leading a healthy life. Of course, it takes a while for an adolescent in particular to realise that a counsellor gives them ideas that they have to put into practice. They tend to think, well, I saw the counsellor and nothing changed, as if there was a magic wand that was supposed to happen. And to think that they had to come out and do something is a source of annoyance and difficult to kind of work through. But in fact, giving someone who's struggling a really good hearing every week outside of the family can really relieve parents from the sense that you have to get it right at all the time. It's not that you're delegating your important function to someone else, but it is saying that doing it alone is sometimes simply too much responsibility. To this point, I think you might all have had the experience where your own need to discuss your grievances is well beyond your friends and family's bandwidth to listen to you. Some of you might have had that experience. You want to talk about your relationship crisis for 5 years. Your friends have got about 6 weeks in them, and then they wish you'd be quiet and get over it. So I think there's also a need to go and see a professional who has the bandwidth, who can listen to you and make sense of why it's 5 years and not 6 weeks, and that they don't have any investment in the outcome or any judgment about your position. I think it's really important that we challenge extreme language to get a better conversation going. You know, with little children, for those of you that are parents, they'll often have a tantrum and you'll be saying, so you're very angry, are you? Which of course generally makes them more furious. But I notice again with my own daughter that she collapses into the same language. Adolescents do this a lot. So she says everything's weird, mostly me, but also she says her friends are weird, teachers are weird. We were walking past a building this morning, she said that was weird. So in the end, what sense do you make of any of that either? So I think challenging kids to be more nuanced in the language they use and to help them not collapse into kind of sloppy expression is important, just by asking some more questions so that you can work out, is this something I should be listening to? Is this the kind of weirdness you respond to or not? I think we should always take seriously the big disclosures. My son this week said, I'd rather kill myself than go to assembly this week. Now, that's the kind of thing, and I notice, in fact, even in our own staff, sometimes they'll say, I was traumatised, the coffee machine didn't work this morning. We fall into this kind of language in a way that isn't acceptable. And needless to say, I said to my son, so we're going to be having a talk about that. And he goes, not the talk, Mum, because we have a few talks about these things. But I think the trouble is that by domesticising important terms, we again start to tune out some really important disclosures. And so I think we need to challenge that. I challenge that in my own workplace, and I think we need to do that in our community. Don't be afraid of big feelings. They're normal and part of life. And generally big feelings, as we know, feel better on the outside than the inside. This is what we say to kids. Speaking to people in distress can help them work the issues through. So often I have people say to me that they feel like a social pariah because they've been through a terrible event and no one wants to ask them how they are because they're very frightened, they'll tell them. And then they think, I'll feel helpless, I won't know what to say, what if I upset them? And this is really common for people who are newly separated or bereaved, that everyone tiptoes around them. And I had an example of this recently where I was at a school event and I approached a couple who I don't really know very well at all and I don't see very often. They have a child in my son's year and a son who was in my daughter's year who was killed 9 months ago in a really appalling, tragic accident that was highly publicised right over the Christmas period. So I hadn't seen them since. So I went up to them and said, I'm so sorry I haven't seen you and I haven't had a chance to acknowledge what's happened to you and, what you might have been going through for 9 months. And so they turned up at a party, to their credit, and were, smiling and cheerful. And so as soon as I said that, the woman started to cry. And we hung in with that conversation. It was a bit of a line call because I didn't want to go up and make small talk because that felt really inauthentic. But it was a party. And once there were tears, I could have backed off. And in fact, I could have run away. Some people might have. But we just sort of hung in and kept talking, and she said a bit more about her experience. And we moved on to things to do with school. But as we talked about my daughter, and of course it reminded her son wouldn't be in the HSC this year, and so she moved in and out of the tears. We talked and the tears came and they went, and the tears came and they went. And of course I felt tearful with her because, this is unbearable. And her husband fairly quickly moved away. She said her youngest son has said he doesn't want anyone to mention it at school, and my own son had told me that, which made him look fine at school, but she said he was having nightmares and didn't sleep well. So eventually we moved on to talk to others, and at the end of the night she came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for asking about me and about us." Now this wasn't about me being a counsellor. I wasn't her counsellor in that moment. Maybe I hung in more because I am a counsellor, but it actually was just being human, I hope, and acknowledging her experience and saying that crying a bit and talking and crying a bit is a bit like life, isn't it? And somehow as a society we need to be a little bit more robust about those moments. But this family raises for me another point, which is that everyone in a family and in a community goes through these experiences very differently. The mother needed to talk. The father needed space. That was evident. He moved away quite quickly. The son needed to have times where he could pretend that nothing was happening. On another day, they might swap roles. Possibly the mother was pretending it wasn't happening and the son was unable to cope. So I think that the other thing we have to remember is you can't homogenise or standardise feelings in a family group. And nor is there a set time where feelings pass. Things take the time that they take. However, all of these variations is another reason why professional support is useful. Not to pathologise it, that we're all travelling fine, but you're clearly not, but to say that families vary in their feelings and that each person takes their own time and that is really normal. We also shouldn't try to inoculate our young people or ourselves from disappointment and pain. I'm working with a mother at the moment who said to me, "I've just realised that I've been bubble wrapping my children for years." The fear that we have of our kids being upset or disappointed gets in the way of them living a full life, which is full of challenges. Helping kids to step up and manage those challenges, learning through experience and feeling more empowered that they can manage these things, to say, you know what, I had a tough day, but I'm up to that. I can get through that. I've got through tough times. That's a real gift. If a young person knows what to do, including some faith in themselves that they can handle the blows that life serves us, that they can trust their own emotions, that they can have a wave of emotions and they will come out the other side, that's the kind of skill set that a child needs to have a good chance of being a good, strong adult. So family life is hugely challenging and we have more demands on us than ever. We're busier than ever. The demands to get 90s in your ATAR, to have a bikini body, to have a great Instagram profile, to excel in your career, to get to the gym, it's endless, the sort of things that are the sort of benchmark for success. Most of it's fanciful. So what we know is that the foundation of a good society is relationships, and we are relational beings, that we need each other for our success and for our survival. These are not to be found on Married at First Sight or The Bachelor, although who knows, you could be lucky. But in fact, they have depth and texture and they take work because any sort of intimacy requires paying attention. It takes two people in the relationship to get it right. Each has to be able to talk about their needs and the other needs to make a reasonable response. It's not one person's job to get the communication right, but there is a lot of skill in it and it's a lifelong learning experience. We have to help our young people do it, but you know, truth be told, I've spent a lot of my career talking to adults that are no better at it, and at times with my multiple degrees and many years in the field, I'm not that crash hot myself. And so we need to be humble and we need to keep trying. So building resilience in the community, speaking up about the tough stuff, leaning into the tears and listening carefully to what each other's saying are some of the skills needed along the journey. I really send my very best wishes to Behind the Smile. I'm delighted to be here, and Relationships Australia New South Wales is so pleased to be working with you. Thank you.